What does it mean for a world to have died? Does it have to be desolate? Does it have to lie in ruins? Or could it be beautiful, still rich with green, still haunted by the rare remaining life form? I ask these questions because the game Gris is quite possibly the most visually breathtaking thing I've ever played. The world is incredible. The colors, the creatures, the landscapes, it's all so alive. Which is important, because I believe the world of Gris is a world that has died. When we think of dead worlds, we typically don't think of beauty. This is especially true for video games, where the word dead usually implies a setting is lacking in meaningful content. But I want to challenge this assumption, to explore environments that are spectacular and filled with artistic merit, yet are, in their own ways, dead. For sometimes the end of a world is just the beginning. Speaking of which, Gris begins with the end of the world. The protagonist, living in a landscape of color upon a mysterious stone hand, finds this realm collapsing around her. Falling through the sky, she descends all the way to the surface, where nothing remains but a monochrome, desolate expanse. From here, the world is split into 5 sections that reflect the 5 stages of grief. Each region is further centered on a dominant color, with gray representing the initial detachment of denial. Recovering from the fall, you wander through a graveyard of bleak ruins, perhaps wreckage from the recent calamity, or perhaps remnants from an age lost to time. The environments of Gris are not meant to be completely literal. The external desolation often a symbolic representation of the main character's inner sorrow. The opening of Gris can be better understood in conversation with this other game about personal loss personified on a vast impersonal scale. Shadow of the Colossus is the kind of title that looms over the entire medium, the iconic story of a lone warrior defeating 16 leviathans to bring a loved one back to life. The game does not, at a glance, take place in a dead world. I mean, there are giant creatures wandering around in it. Hard to get more alive than that, right? Yet the Forbidden Lands, the forgotten, cursed region where the game takes place, somehow manage to feel blank. The kind of blankness that hollows you out. It takes so long to travel to each Colossus that the towering giants start to seem hopelessly minuscule next to the bleak enormity of the land itself. There's an argument to be made that this feeling of blankness was even more profound in earlier versions of the game due to limited graphical detail. But even in the remastered version, the wrongness of this land is unmistakable. Like this is a world that life has forsaken. Though often beautiful, it is, in its own way, a dead world. But Shadow of the Colossus has more in common with the first stage of Gris than just its setting. It is also, quite overtly, a story about denial. It is clear from the opening sequence that this deal the main character is struck to resurrect their loved one is extremely dodgy, and yet it's easy for both the protagonist and the player to ignore any feelings of unease, because there are monsters to fight. But as the game wears on, you start to think more and more about how most of these creatures only become aggressive if you attack first. I'm far from the first person to make this point, but because of the environment's bareness, you're left alone with your thoughts between each battle. This makes it harder to hide from the fact that you're extinguishing some of the last remaining beings in this world, all because you can't let go of a personal loss. If you return to a spot where you slew a Colossus, you will find their bodies have become part of the landscape, the surroundings sweeping in to reclaim these last vestiges of life. It is impossible, when exploring these remains, to hide from the reality of what you've done. Though you, like the protagonist, want to keep denying that the world, their world, is really dead, the physicality of these bodies make the truth of bereavement undeniable. It's not clear, at first, whom the protagonist of Gris is grieving for, but it is clear she is grieving for someone who is central to her emotional world. Their significance quite literally embodied in the colossal statues littered throughout the land. That disintegrating hand in the opening represented their passing, yet they stood so tall in the protagonist's life that their remains continue to shape the environment long after their death. The way death alters the landscapes of these games reminds me of a real natural phenomenon. When a whale swims its last, the carcass will sometimes sink all the way to the ocean floor and create something called a whalefall. The impact of a whalefall on the abyssal ecosystem is, well, colossal. A single carcass can bring more organic material to the seafloor than 200 years of nutrients falling from the surface. Like grief, whalefalls too can be divided into specific stages. In the initial scavenger stage, specialized foragers pillage the Leviathan from all directions. After playing Shadow of the Colossus, I think I kind of know what that feels like. For the next 2 years, the whale's remains will become animated with movement, a tumultuous new ecosystem formed from the remains of a dead one. The world of Gris, likewise, doesn't remain gray forever, and as denial turns to anger, harsh splotches of red seep into the surrounding environment. You slide, emboldened with reckless fury, down a steep slope into an unforgiving desert. Ruins streak these maroon sands, the jutting spires like the tips of spears left over from some ancient battle. Storms also sweep through this region, watercolor swirls of blood red that make it wise to seek shelter. Yet critically, the game gives you the option to face these storms head-on, and though you'll inevitably be blown backwards, it's difficult to resist the temptation to charge blindly forward and become angry at the world itself. The game Hollow Knight similarly encourages you to think combatively. With its punishing difficulty and aggressive enemies, the game makes it feel like it's you against the world. Set in the fallen kingdom of Hallownest, Hollow Knight's ecosystem is plagued by a supernatural illness known simply as the Infection, an apocalyptic epidemic that manifests in the form of rageful insects and great pustules of disease. The background design can make the entire world feel like a kind of infection, an unwanted growth upon a long-dead exoskeleton. Yet Hollow Knight is also full of quiet expressions of endurance, perseverance even in the grimmest environments. Though nominally a game about violence, I think it's also a game about rebirth, and how beauty can emerge in the toughest conditions. In the second stage of Gris, you can encounter, in the shelters, creatures living inside chunks of ruins. Like the denizens of Hollow Knight, one could interpret these life forms, which come in all shapes and sizes, as infections, unwanted parasites plaguing the corpse of a lost civilization. But there's also something poignant here, a testament to adaptability in the face of adversity, one that can help you appreciate the value of knowing when to take shelter. Perhaps a version of the world has perished, but if you let go of your anger, you can see that new life has taken root. With the protagonist's anger subsiding, the world transforms in an eruption of green. Enormous vines snake across the landscape, leading down far below another layer of clouds to a vast, inviting forest. Your grief has now entered the bargaining stage, and it's easy to feel like your sorrows will no longer shape the world, that there will be no traces of decay in this landscape. Yet even in the midst of the forest, the shells of abandoned buildings still remain, the remnants overrun with encroaching plant life. How should we feel when we see cities reclaimed by nature? It's a question that was on my mind a lot when I played Cloud Gardens, a peaceful gardening simulator crossed with a dystopian landscape builder, I guess? In this game, you help plants swallow up the wreckage of humanity, an activity that elicits complicated emotions. On the one hand, Cloud Gardens has a charming voxel aesthetic that makes turning decrepit cityscapes into bastions of life quite satisfying. But on the other hand, well, there's definitely no sign of living people in these landscapes. In his book, The World Without Us, American journalist Alan Wiseman explores what would theoretically happen to human structures and objects if we all suddenly disappeared. And the answer, for the most part, is that nature would erase all traces of humanity extremely quickly. Most buildings would be gone in just a few hundred years. Certain plastics and metals would linger a little longer, but not forever. On a geological timescale, our built environments would be gone in the blink of an eye. There's a kind of mental bargaining that goes on when I try to decide how such facts make me feel. Is it comforting to know that new life would grow from the skeleton of humanity if our species were to go extinct? Or is it terrifying to imagine being forgotten so easily? There are no other humans left in the forest of Gris, but there is a little robot, who you, fittingly, have to literally bargain with to find a way out of the woods. It's a sweet change of pace from your lonesome travels, yet something about the way the robot knows all the ins and outs of the forest can make you feel like it belongs in this reborn world in a way that you just don't. The world you knew is gone, and no amount of bargaining will change that. As the protagonist floats once more in the palm of the person she lost, the landscape changes a fourth time, and the long melancholy of sadness begins. This stage of grief is represented, unsurprisingly, by shades of blue. Rain begins to fall like teardrops as you strike out through a flooded, watercolor landscape. Yet while the surface of this region is gloomy, if you dive under the waters, you'll find a thriving ecosystem of fish. It's a jarring transition. How can this dead world, a world in the wake of a calamity, be so full of life? I don't think I've ever seen a setting more vibrant than the one in Abzu. A game where you steer a diver through gorgeous undersea environments. The ecosystem is just overflowing with movement. I genuinely don't even know how it's possible for a title from 2016 to simulate this many schools of fish at a time. If you just stop the camera, anywhere, the sheer amount of marine life that will swim by is just insane. It's all so kinetic, so interactive, so full of vitality. I don't know that there's ever been a world more emphatically alive than this one. And yet the world of Abzu is haunted by death. From early in the game, you can stumble upon murals from a doomed civilization. Each fragment tells of a culture that fell, of a people whose memory is lost to the waves. Their crumbling halls now home to the creatures of the deep. There are ruins in the ocean of Gris as well, sunken temples overgrown with forests of coral. It reminds me of the second stage of a Whalefall, where groves of lifeforms known as zombie worms spread their roots into the bones. They pick the skeleton completely clean, making it hard to imagine the animal as it once was. But there's a moment in Abzu that conveys the splendor of a living whale better than perhaps any other piece of media. It is, at first, a tranquil moment where you swim with a mother and calf through the open ocean. And as you swim, an entire pod of whales joins your dive, opening their mouths wide to take huge gulps of krill. And then they swim on, and you think the moment is over, until another pod of whales, even larger than the first, comes in from the other direction, and before you even have a chance to fully process the sight, this happens. A blue whale emerges from off-screen, its eye right next to you, just staring. And then the camera pulls all the way back and you realize you're in the midst of another pod, and they all start spinning through the depths, brimming with life and majesty. And then, at last, this pod departs as well, and you realize you've accidentally traveled all the way down to the very bottom of the ocean. And what you find down here is a vast boneyard of whales forgotten on the sea floor. It's a real tonal shift that can be read as pessimistic. But I think that would be doing this moment a disservice, because even though these skeletons are picked clean, that doesn't mean they're lifeless. In the third and final stage of a Whalefall, the bones appear deserted, but they're actually full of bacteria that provide vital sulfides to the surrounding ecosystem. Other forms of life can flourish around a Whalefall for up to half a century, sometimes longer than the lifespan of the whales themselves. Maybe the bionetwork of Abzu is built upon remains, but it's likely because of these remains that so much life has gathered in one place. Even in the best of circumstances, however, the presence of any skeleton implies a cause of death. For worlds, this typically means some kind of apocalyptic event, the sort of big destructive moment that disaster movies love to show us in gratuitous detail. I think it's important, therefore, that you never see the calamity that sank the civilization in Abzu. You also never learn what emptied the world in Cloud Gardens, or made the cursed lands in Shadow of the Colossus, cursed. Even Gris, which is about the passing of a specific person as much as the world, never gives us any insight into the demise itself. In the context of these narratives, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what happens next. If any force in Gris could be labeled apocalyptic, it would be the tendrils of shadow that haunt the protagonists throughout their journey. Likely a representation of grief's most destructive tendencies, this darkness constantly threatens to overwhelm the main character. Like sorrow itself, it knows no boundaries, following you into any environment. In one underwater section, it becomes a giant eel that pursues you through the tight corridors in one of the tensest chase scenes I've ever witnessed. Like death, it seems inescapable, able to split itself into two to cut off your escape, or transform into 1,000 little eels that chase you into the blackness. One of the grimmest dead worlds I've seen is There Will Come Soft Rains, a 1984 Soviet animated short film. Based on a Ray Bradbury story of the same name, the narrative follows the automatic systems of a house continuing their pre-programmed daily routines, despite the fact the people of the house are ashes. It is revealed that this building is the last one standing on a planet that has otherwise been obliterated by nuclear war. The title for There Will Come Soft Rains comes from a poem by Sarah Teasdale, which the house recites part of at the end of the story.
Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone.
Though not exactly uplifting, this poem, like Bradbury's short story, is more tranquil than the animated short. I think there is a kind of comfort one can take in this idea of nature continuing on without us, particularly in 1918 when the poem was written, against the backdrop of the First World War. The poem, and many of the games in this video, imply that if a version of the world comes to an end, another will take its place. Even in the darkness, there is light. The very last color of Gris is an illuminating shade of yellow, representing the stage of acceptance. Significantly, however, this final stage does not return the world to a pre-ruined state. The architecture, though brighter, is still withered and overgrown with plants. Acceptance doesn't mean returning to the way things were, just recognizing them as they are. I don't think any game exemplifies this concept better than Sable, the final title I want to discuss today. Set within a harsh desert, Sable has, on the surface, the most conventionally desolate post-apocalyptic world in this entire video. But it is not, to a remarkable degree, a game interested in mourning the past. None of the people you speak to are wistful of ages gone, or lamenting the desolation that surrounds them. Though there isn't as much wildlife in this land as most of the other games in this video, people delight in the animals they have all the more. Everyone's satisfaction, presumably, is because so much time has passed, no one remembers the way things used to be. The world has mourned, and now it has moved on. Indeed, as a coming-of-age story, Sable's narrative is deeply focused on the future, on what's waiting over the next horizon. I think it's fitting that the largest structure in Sable is a set of ruins nicknamed the Whale. Implied to have once been part of an interstellar ship, these ruins have been pulled apart for building materials to make new houses. Likewise, there are theories that there is actually a secret fourth stage to Whalefalls, where their skeleton provides a structure for new coral reefs. Since scientists have only been researching Whalefalls for a few decades, it's currently unknown how far into the future this stage could sustain life. Is a Whalefall really dead? I mean, certainly the whale is dead. That original life form will never swim again, no matter how positive we want to be about its role in the circle of life. I don't want to trivialize the idea of a dead world. Not all these games leave you feeling uplifted, and not all of them should. Acceptance isn't about feeling happy forever. It just means an acknowledgement of a loss. And for all their beauty, these worlds are tragic. There is grief here, just as there are moments of delight. These worlds have died, and the world lives on. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this entry, please lend your support by liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification icon to stay up to date on all things curious. See you in the next video.